The large part of our focus is on publishing and the back-end systems. We do all the deployments for PTU and live releases, and so all the code fixes, everything that gets done by the developers in the development studios comes here for the builds, and then that goes to QA and eventually becomes a publish. It goes out to the players. In our run-up to 3.0, I think things really got intense for most of the support teams that we have here in Austin. I know that the QA team was working pretty much around the clock, keeping up with the amount of build candidates that we had flowing through the system. And every time they find a bug, the developers were really quick to send in fixes, and so we were really pushing a lot of builds, a lot of build candidates. As you know, we went through a lot of PTU publishes, multiple publishes per week. All of this is driving us toward the final 3.0 release. And we had hoped to put it out a little bit earlier, but every time we'd get a build, we'd say just a little bit more, a little bit more fixes, a little bit more improvements. And so toward the end, we were really stressing all of our systems. Our critical systems were at 4x capacity, and we were really, I think there was a buzz here. Everybody was really having a good time. We were working long hours, but everybody had that energy, and we were happy. But of course, when you push the systems this hard, oftentimes you end up kind of overdoing it a little bit. And so we definitely had some system failures toward the end. In fact, right at the very end, it was our last candidate. We had overdrived our storage systems to the point where some of the drives overheated, and we lost one of our flash arrays. And this was a pretty critical time because that was our live release. And we were suddenly faced with this prospect of, what if we can't publish before Christmas? So, but fortunately, all the guys in this team are really used to this kind of pressure, and so everybody jumped to action, and we were able to do some quick maneuvering within the build system, and IT jumped in. We had like 6 or 7 drives to replace. It didn't take long before we were back up and running. It made a late night for us, but we finally got it out. So I felt really good that we actually accomplished it in spite of the challenges that we had. Ahmed, he's like a one-man army for us. Once we had released the 3.0, immediately we saw a tremendous response. And so many people came in. It was really exciting to see them on the Delta Patcher, and all of our graphs were lighting up with the amount of bandwidth we're consuming. And of course, people start jumping into the servers, and we immediately saw growth beyond our expectations. We thought we had planned pretty well, but Ahmed was very quick to grow the server space and the server capacity in the regions that we needed it. And I don't think he really stopped over the holidays. Everybody said goodbye, great job, job well done. And Ahmed just kept on going. I think he really enjoys doing that. I think that was probably the best holiday gift we could have given him, was to be able to keep working on the servers. We did have a number of issues pop up during the holidays, and it's just the stuff we kind of expected, some that we didn't. But fortunately now we've spent enough time working on our back-end systems and our back-end procedures that we were able to do quite a bit without having to do an actual patch, which is important because I think the players noticed. I noticed some of the live streamers who were having a good time, and they could tell that systems were improving even as they were playing. And that's Ahmed and his team doing their work on the back end over the Christmas break that everybody enjoyed.
3.0 was such a big release that has a lot of anticipation on our end, and I'm sure like on the backers end as well, that we had to plan very, very well for it. Whenever you are about to make such a large release to a larger audience across regional locations in the cloud, where you're gonna allocate servers in the US, in the EU, in Australia, you have to coordinate with your cloud provider to make sure that there is enough capacity for what you are about to do. And right before releasing 3.0, AWS services announced a new generation of high compute VMs called C5. And we were right on, like once we received the news that they have them now generally available, we have already adopted them in our pipeline. So it was an important thing for us to make sure that the game is gonna run on the latest VMs. It was the latest hypervisor, the latest CPUs that we can get in AWS, but at the same time, we are trying to allocate a large number of resources at the newest, hottest generation in all instances. So we had to file a lot of like limit increase requests with them, making sure that there is going to be enough capacity. We had to have backup plans. So if we're going to have a region in Ireland, I cannot only rely that I'm going to get all my instances from there. I can have another backup region in Paris. Same thing like here in the US, we would have a main region in Northern Virginia and a backup region in Oregon. Even within the region itself, there are ways to allocate your request and your networking in a way that you can maximize your availability and work around any quirks that you can see during deployment. It was definitely not an easy release, but I think it was the most cared for release. Like, I think I've witnessed a lot of releases. I've been dealing with live releases, I think, since 1.2 or 1.3. I believe 1.2. And every single public release, I was a major part of it. That release was the most cared for. That release took the most amount of hot fixes, of changes that were done on the fly, where players can really, like, we were also so graceful with the way we were applying hot fixes in a lot of situations that had to incur extra effort in us to make sure that the fix can exist without kicking all players out, with maintaining the highest stability. So yeah, the release started. We allocated large numbers of VMs because we were anticipating a lot of players. Now with the Delta Batcher, a lot of players already were in the BTO from last night. And we knew the moment we opened the servers, we'll have like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. These are going to be easy numbers because a lot of players have been playing in the BTU. And all what we expected we would write. We would just keep allocating more resources, building more instances, and everything was going relatively good. We were trying to look at the performance because the behavior of the players in public is completely different than BTU. When the players are in Avocado or in BTU for a while, you start getting used to that daily thing where you walk in the game, look around, see what's going on. That's a completely different behavior from a player who haven't seen 3.0 at all. I just want to see it for the first time. And then you have 50 of them in the same instance trying to see what Z will do. So yeah, a few hours in, we started realizing that we have some sort of a deadlock at DGS with the dedicated game server. We get in a situation where it spins over something and players end up like disconnecting and the game server crashes, and going a lot through the logs that an environment at the size of live generates is just insane. Like, you're imagining 60, 70,000 messages every 30 seconds. That's the amount of logs that gets processed and indexed every 30 seconds. So you have to sift through these logs super quick to figure out what's going on. There must be a common factor, a common medium, why all of these are crashing. Why is it all crashing in a specific pattern we haven't seen before? And then we realized there's one of the missions causes some sort of issue with the physics that causes DGS to get deadlocked. And in no time, we were talking 23rd of December, a lot of people just went home, gonna enjoy their holiday, but it doesn't matter. Like, in no time, I had the back-end service team with me, I had Tony Zervik with me, and we made some tweaks, and that was the first hotfix. We mitigated this crash, we dealt with it, and the game started. And it just, like Jeffrey Pease always say, that it's like an onion. You're peeling it off, and as you uncover a layer of instability or a layer of an issue, you get to see another one. We started realizing that introduction is really, really, really intense, and it's affecting the gameplay experience. Players get interdicted a lot, amount of AI in the instance, and we had to make changes in the matchmaker, in the way it matches players into instances. We had to tweak more different aspects in the service probability volume service, responsible for doing this logic and managing it. And that actually was a good thing when it comes to like relying on service as a model rather than keeping everything in the game server itself. Having a lot of logic outside the game server allowed us to make a lot of hotfixes. So very long story short, that took, I think, 3 or 4 days. Like, I believe the 23rd, 25th, 26th, these are just one thing. They're just one thing of watching a change after change and trying to see the performance, trying to see the difference. And everyone was there. Like, we had QA with us, we had Tony Zervik working with us. Chris Roberts himself was like almost every 1 hour, making sure what's going on, making different decisions, changing our strategy, how we try to deal with it, how we look at it. It was just a great thing. We enjoyed the vacation with the players, watching these hours-long YouTube videos of gameplay, watching people really, really happy with being able to play 3.0 before 2017 ends. So yeah, It was not an easy release, but I don't think anything will top 3.0 for quite a while.
It's a lot of kind of judging different priorities, and so one of the challenges was in Austin we handle the publishes. So we've been when we started publishing at the beginning of October, we started publishing nearly every day, and so we had to balance that with other testing priorities. And so I would think that would be one of our biggest challenges, and so that entailed us to work really closely with stakeholders in production to figure out the right priority, and so we can make sure we can get tested what needed to be tested on a case-by-case basis. So when we do find an issue we deem to be rather serious, what we do is we'll write it up in our project management software. We use Jira, and then we'll email it out to the leadership of the team, and then they can it gives the issue visibility, and then people can make decisions on whether that would either stop the publish, or if it wasn't a publish situation, it would get everybody together to solve the issue. We have a test request system developed by our own Chris Eckersley, our QA lead in the UK, and that was as we approached the deadline for 3.0, development started utilizing that process more and more. Because as we approached the deadline, build stability started to be more and more important, and we couldn't risk the 3.0 becoming unstable right at this critical juncture. So the development adopted the QA test request system more vigorously, and every single feature-related check-in towards the end had to be tested properly, and so that increased our workload immensely. At the same time, we had to continue these publishes nearly daily.
One of the things that we're now doing is we actually have monitoring systems now that can see what players are doing, how many players on a server, what their performance is, and if we sense if the monitoring system sense any degradation, or if there's any kind of a problem, one of the things we can do now is mark that server for downgrade, so that without having a serious drop, like dumping people off of their game session, that we can easily let them fade off, so that when they log out and come back in, they'll be automatically switched to a new server. What we do is we use this as a method to apply hot fixes. So we don't have to do an immediate downing of all the services and then bring them back up, which would be very disruptive to all our gameplay. Especially now that people have missions and there's really a lot more to do. We wanted to do it this way so that it would really be behind the scenes. You can get these fixes in. Now, this is not all fixes, but a lot of the fixes that we saw during the holiday break were things that we could do on the back end through hot fixing in this manner.
One of the things we have seen in this release that was really interesting is player retention, how players want to keep playing. So every now and then we would face an issue with one of the services that might kick 600-700 players. In most industries, that your client is such a, like in the web industry where I came, if the page started loading like half a second more or a second more, that really affects your user time. People just go do something else, go read something else. That was not the case. We would have a crash, it wipes out like 400 players, and then we get back like 600. It was just, players knew that the game is out there to be enjoyed, and also at the same time to figure out bugs that we cannot figure out without these insane large concurrencies that we were having. Thanks to the new Delta Batcher, we were able to get the players like in super fast time. Whoever patched the BTU the day before, whoever was in Avocado was able to get a new batch super fast. Actually, a lot of them were trying to figure out how the trade system works, building trade apps, a lot of them trying to correlate bugs to each other's. Whenever I was watching the servers during the holiday, I would be watching server stats, looking at different metrics. And at the same time, I'm watching forums, watching chat, watching all kind of social media. And a lot of times you would get tip about something happening because they manage to they know it's not just a game here just to spend time to play the game, to do the mission. They know they are part of the game. What they're doing is the game. They're building the game with us. So they start testing every single possibility and just letting us know, telling, oh, if I did this and I did that, I really think that this kind of ship is the reason behind the bad performance or the reason behind this glitch we are seeing.
We spent a lot of time watching the PTU and just looking for our major crashes and things that were, players were encountering that was making the game unplayable. And we worked really hard to figure those out, and on Saturday we felt like we were ready and we went ahead and published 3.0. So on Saturday evening, Ahmed and I were setting up various servers for Arena Commander and Star Marine and additional PU instances, and we were looking at the crashes, and we saw a lot of people were having issues getting in and a lot of servers were crashing. So we had to work with Tony Z to figure out what was happening, and we found out that players were able to get asteroids over at Olisar still, and that was causing a lot of crashes. So we had to log into the QA servers and duplicate the issue and then test the fixes. At one point we did have to do some major restarts, but we did probably 3 or 4 hot fixes throughout the period between Saturday and the end of our holiday break. Justin, myself, and a few others were logging in from home and checking the QA servers to see if the new fixes were going to cause any issues, and then we would hot fix the game servers on the fly, with Ahmed.
It's just a different experience. How close we are, as usually people doing my job would not have a lot of contact or even knowing their end user. Like if I'm running a web server that serves millions of users per day, no one will ever know me, know my name, have to deal with me. And Star Citizen, it's a different experience because you feel like each one of these guys is dedicating hours of his day to come play the game, test the game, and try to have fun. Completely different, intimate relationship between you and your end user. You get to know, it's a different feel. It's a different feel. With 3.0, exactly, it was much more because we knew that's holidays. Players are hanging out with their families, but at the same time, we want to see the concurrency. Every single time we release, we want to see how high it can get, how many concurrent players we can have, what kind of issues we'll see at that scale. And we had insane concurrency. People definitely are not having Christmas dinner now. They're playing the game. It was a lot of fun.
Under any other project I've been on, you would have a team in the dozens, if not in the scores of people working to support this amount of service. But we really only have a handful of guys, but they're just so good at what they do. I know they're watching every little aspect, every frame rate, every piece of memory. They're keeping an eye on it and watching the traffic patterns of the users. So one of the things that Ahmed really enjoys doing is bringing servers up when certain time zones happen so that we have enough capacity, or taking them down to save a little money. All this is critical work, and eventually we'll have a whole separate team to do just that. But for now, it's pretty much Ahmed's fun project.
That initial publish to the Evocati was our first step into getting 3.0 out the door. And that first night when we were deploying, we actually had a 6-hour Skype call with the deployment team just to make sure that everything was going the way it should. The reason it took so long was that we really hadn't deployed with this new launcher and with a bunch of the backend services changes that we had. So we wanted to make sure that we got everything right, and we updated our checklists to make sure that everything went smoothly and we could monitor the servers as the players started to come in. Well, there's just so many changes being introduced with 3.0, right? Basically the entire game had changed. All the backend services had been rewritten. It was a brand new launcher, so we wanted to make sure that while we tested it for many weeks with QA prepping for the Evocati, you just can never predict. You'll give it to one backer who has some weird setup, and it just takes the whole system down, or encounter some weird issue with the release channels. So, we just wanted to make sure things went as smoothly as possible. After the first Evocati push, we had just dozens and dozens of deployments. And, now that we had the Delta patcher, we could put out builds easily every day, and just iterating with the feedback from the Evocati, and then ultimately from the public PTU feedback we were getting, and just pushing out builds as fast as we could with as many fixes and feature deployments as we could. Once we hit the public group, things changed a little because the deployment process from Evocati is fairly simple. We do a much faster checklist just to get the build out to them. Once the build is going to the public audience, the QA checklist actually ends up taking a little bit longer to make sure things are tested a little better. And then as we moved into late December and started heading towards live, we started doing more and more checks and having to recheck some of the older systems that maybe had been neglected for a little bit because we were just pushing out so many fixes and so many, you know, new features into the build that, you know, like we had to double check, like, hey, Arena Commander was working a couple weeks ago. Let's do another, you know, deep dive into it to make sure nothing broke in the meantime. You know, and then that actually ended up running into that Saturday, you know, December 23rd, where we a small team came in on Austin to deploy on that Saturday. When we deployed around about 2:30-ish Austin time on December 23rd, that Saturday. And then immediately we were monitoring all the core services and the game servers, talking to players to make sure, you know, things were working okay. There were a couple issues with some of the missions or interdiction that we found immediately. And the great thing about some of the work Tony Z has done is that all of those backend services run, you know, on our side to where he can make changes to the code, the missions, the, you know, interdiction timings, or how often it happens. And we can deploy those hot fixes on our end and then gracefully restart all of the servers so that players don't even really know anything's changed, but things get much better. So we actually ended up deploying hot fixes almost every single day of the Christmas break, starting from the 24th all the way through, I think, January 2nd.
Christmas night was pretty interesting because for the most part the instances were fine all day, and then all of a sudden things started to happen. And we were, you know, logging in remote, and a bunch of us were, we didn't really do any calls, but we were all in Skype, you know, just, you know, trying to figure out what was happening. And I think it was like 3 a.m. and some people realized that they needed to put Christmas presents under the tree. And but, you know, we were all watching the servers. I was providing, you know, FPS information to Chris and Tony, providing, you know, other graphs to show them what the fixes had, how the fixes had improved the gameplay. There are things the players can do that will sometimes cause the instance to get in a bad state. That we can see that in graphs, and we can kind of predict that and fix that before we can make an instance set so that it, you know, nobody will go into it, and it'll slowly, once everybody's left, it'll restart itself. And it's, you know, we do a lot of things to make sure that the players aren't affected as much as possible.
So what would happen is we would identify an issue. So for instance, that first day on the 23rd, there were asteroids popping. That was actually an environment mission that was spawning in places it shouldn't be spawning at, and causing all kinds of physics grid nonsense that that was just causing massive FPS drops, right? And so what Tony ended up doing is just removing that mission from the actual service, and we just rebooted everything. And we have a way of, we can ungracefully, you know, force everyone out of the servers and shut everything down and restart it. But we also have the option to gracefully restart services. So what happens is Jim will look at what servers have their population declining, and once the population of a server reaches 0, it'll just reboot that one. So we'll actually have players experiencing a slightly different game at different times because not every instance has been restarted. But then over the course of the next, you know, 24 hours, all the servers will just naturally restart, and then they'll be running on the better code. I would say that right now, one of the biggest struggles we're having is that the connection to like our database and our persistence cache kind of can fall over. And when that happens, there's this short window where if a player does anything while that service is down, it just causes all kinds of wild inconsistencies with the data. And this will often end up with the player accounts becoming broken, and we'll have to go in as game support and say, okay, I can reset your data here, or, you know, we can fix this. Unfortunately, it means like a lot of players lose out on missions, or their cargo gets lost. And it's unfortunate, but we have already identified most of those issues and are working on fixes.
We're doing something that no other game I've worked on is doing. It's, you know, this combination of MMO, simulator, sim, FPS, all in one giant seamless universe. From a player's perspective, it's like, you know, that's crazy. How are they going to do that? Then from a QA experience, it's how are they going to do that? I want to understand this, and so it's been a learning experience and a lot of fun.
The team has just been doing such an incredible job, and I'm just so proud of them. I have such an accomplished and capable leadership team, and from the QA managers all the way down to the QA testers, everybody on the team in their own right is a rock star, and together they just successfully support the development of the team, and I'm just really proud of that.
I think there's a lot of people that realized in at least with this particular publish cycle, because it was such an important one for us, that all of our process kicks in when that final build comes. for that final publish. But what people don't remember is that this team is doing that constantly. Every time we do a publish to the PTU, it's pretty much the same process. It's just to different servers with different security protocols. So for the most part, the team is doing this every day. Now, you may only see 2 publishes, 3 publishes a week, but we're actually running the process for a published candidate every day. It's not until the very end when QA tells us whether or not we can actually release that version or if there's some critical fix that they're waiting for. But by then, the work has already been done. So we're constantly publishing, constantly exercising the systems, and this helps us to really clean out any of the rough edges and smooth things over so that when we do have a major 3.0 publish, it really goes down pretty much like clockwork. In fact, I remember one of the things that it wasn't really frustrating, but I just noticed that it happened, is we have a very rigid checklist that we follow to make sure that everybody does every step in a proper order. The team was publishing so quickly that night that it was hard for the production team to even keep up with the checklist just because things were happening so rapidly.